Visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Gary Ullman. Abandoned by William Clark Russell. Chapter 8. Conversations and Confidences. Reynolds started to climb the hill, stepping fast. He gained the group of sailors who all pointed at the sea together as he came and explained nearly in one voice, "There she is, sir." Far out upon the sea hung what might have seemed to a landsman a rising star, pale as the pearl of the moon when she floats in the blue of the day. But the sailors knew that speck of light to be a ship which way standing they could not tell. Reynolds looked but could not see her. "There she is, sir." Ah! They might point, but Reynolds failed to perceive her. "You have no doubt she is a ship," said he with the look of a blind man, as he turned his face upon the seaman. "Oh, yes, sir, that's the sail of a ship right enough," answered the boatswain, who had dropped his task of plaiting a mesh to view the ship from the hillside. "Can you see our boat down there, sir?" "Why, of course, clear enough, and I dare say I shall be able to see that ship if she lifted her hull," answered Reynolds. Again he strove with his eyes at the sea line, and he saw nothing but the junction of heaven and water. "It may be that vessel have passed within sight, but at a great distance, and I have not seen them," said he. "She is too far off to be of any good to us," said one of the men with a nod at the sail. "But it's clear that this island is sighted, and as I was a-saying down below there, I'm for keeping all fast and giving ourselves a chance before we agree to take what is to come by putting to sea without a sail." "And with a beaker holding 6 gallons only," said Reynolds. "Aye," said the boatswain, "it ought to be a vat. You'll find plenty of fuel laid ready for a smoke up in the hollow there," said Reynolds, pointing to the place he meant. "Day to day I have seen to that, but never a chance was given me to fire it." "What do you get fired from, sir?" asked the boatswain. Reynolds pulled out his burning glass. "Can you still see her?" he asked. "Oh, yes," answered one of the men, "but she's passing away. She's dying out." One remained to watch and report. Reynolds rejoined Goodhart. "I'm not surprised that you shouldn't see her," said Goodhart. "You generally find that the vision of one eye sympathizes with that of the other. And how far distant is she, do you think?" "Why, we should command a view of 25 miles up there, and she's just in sight, the men say, and fading," said Reynolds. "Well," answered Goodhart, "her appearance determines me to stop. I'm convinced that an island situated as this is must be frequently sighted and occasionally visited. What do you say now to the chance supplied you by a passing ship and a fast boat to get at her, and nothing but the same boat without mast or sail and a 6-gallon keg?" "Oh, Mr. Goodhart, you have not yet had 7 months of it," answered Reynolds with a sort of sick shudder. "But you're alive, sir, and well, and you need but a barber and a tailor to return to the aspect you have doffed. But an open boat? Figure 3 weeks, and all the fresh water gone, and the fevers come upon you again." Mr. Goodhart added blandly, but with a deliberation that made you understand that the teeth of his mind were set, "I stay here, and I hope these men won't be foolhardy enough to quit the island unless to pursue a ship. They look at the hill, and I saw the man who had been left to watch coming down, whereby they knew that the distant vision of light had vanished. The men passed the day in fishing, cooking, preparing the cave with conches and bolsters of grass for the night. The river was just a walk, for this was, as we know, but a little island 1 mile long and 3/4 wide, and if a man felt thirsty, he could slake his thirst in a few minutes in the sweet cold water that came down the hill in silver hawsers and foamed in glory where the little river began. A fine night came along this, the first night of Goodhart and the men of the Asmund's visit. They had some plug tobacco amongst them, and there were pipes of the year 1800 or thereabouts in the old sea chest. A coat that had been taken from the chest by Reynolds and cast and left upon the floor of the curb proved as good as tinder. They cut off a piece, and Goodhart gave them a wax match out of a silver box, with which they set fire to the piece of old coat. This glowed long enough to enable them to smoke and relight and smoke again. Goodhart and Reynolds walked together upon the white beach that streamed before and behind them like ivory in the clear light of the moon. Their shadows marched black at their sides. The sea under the moon quivered with her light. The air was filled with the solemn roar of the bursting surge southeast, and with the cymbals of the cataracts threading with metallic music the delicate orchestra of the wind in the dark vegetation, and with the weary voice of the wheeling breakers rolling into foam upon the sand. As they paced, Goodhart talked of himself. "My father," he said, "was a clergyman who had made a living in Ireland. Do I call it a living? God help him. We were so poor that unless he caught a hare for dinner, we went without a midday meal. Of all forms of poverty, the poverty of the poor clergyman is the most distressful, for he cannot lie in hiding as a retired serviceman might. He must go about. His linen must be clean, his apparel decent. He must have words of sympathy, and even a trifle in the money when, as God knows, he grievously wants these things himself. He had but 2 children, myself and my sister. She was a girl sweet to the sight as a plum tree in May. But the good die first, said Wordsworth, and she was carried off by a galloping consumption. I did not choose to starve at home, so I made my way to Waterford and got a berth as a cabin boy and cook's mate in a crazy old brig called the Emerald Isle. She was a coaster, and the soft tack we got was not half so soft as the hard weather was hard. I afterwards shipped as an ordinary seaman in a bark commanded by a Yankee, who was without doubt the greatest outrage upon the image of God that was ever perpetrated by those dangerous Confederates against the peace of the world. I mean man and woman. I fled from this scoundrel at Boston and shipped for Australia, where, in company with nearly the whole crew, I ran. I found work and made a little money and married. Oh, Captain Reynolds, it is hard to love and lose, to love well and lose irremediately." "I have loved and lost and know what you mean," answered Reynolds. "But your wife lives. Tell me your story, Mr. Goodhart." "It is told. I lingered in Australia, then made up my mind to return to England and die there. I think I explained why I chose the Esmond. Did nothing belong to your ship, a body, or what the law holds more precious, goods, come ashore? Nothing. I looked for a corpse. My ship's sole relic is the person who speaks to you. Do you lose much by this disaster?" "More than I can afford. I am a poor man." Goodhart halted and looked at the sea. "It is a mighty cemetery," he said. "There is no foaming head of billow that should prove one too many as a gravestone for the dead in the deep. I can't but think drowning one of the most painful forms of death. The agony may be brief, but, whilst it is with you, I have some time during my loneliness," said Reynolds, as they resumed their walk, "tried to disturb my mind by conjecturing whether we suffer pain after death." Goodhart's head slowly shook in the moonshine. "A man dies," continued Reynolds, "and a new form of vital activity begins. His body changes into chemicals, gases, and the like. Are these changes accompanied by sensation? Sensations can exist without the consciousness of sensation, as we know from the circumstances that sensation occupies an appreciable time to travel from any given part of the body to the brain. If there is no consciousness to receive sensation," said Goodhart, "it is not present. so far as we are concerned, and therefore when we die pain ends. I forget the speed of sensation, said Reynolds. Helmholtz, answered Goodhart, computes it at about 70 feet a second. Yes, I remember, exclaimed Reynolds, so that if you should let fall a paving stone on the bunion of a giant 70 feet tall, a second would elapse before his brain received the news. Another appreciable interval must be allowed to enable the molecules of the brain to adjust themselves for the reception of the report, and another second must pass whilst the brain is telegraphing to the foot to kick or stamp. Sensation, therefore, in this case is present without consciousness. Why not in a human corpse that is undergoing all sorts of transmutations? The times have been that when the brains were out the man would die, and there an end, answered Goodhart. I do not care whether I am to have sensation or not after I am dead. I only desire to understand that I shall not feel. You remarked this morning, Mr. Goodhart, that we are beset with mysteries, said Reynolds. What is more absolutely impenetrable than the mystery of sensation? We are told that it is merely the translation of the vibration of an object into consciousness in us. But why that consciousness should be clothed, the vibration with form, color, music, flavor, fragrance, softness or hardness, heat or cold, and the countless conditions of life, spiritual and physical, is God's secret and apparently must forever be so. I answer you thus, said Goodhart. We have 5 senses, and all the qualities and inherent conditions of the objects we hear, see, and feel, and so on, make individual appeals to us through these senses. The objects are there, and they report themselves as there. For if they were not there, what news could vibration vehicle? I have no shadow of a doubt that, outside what we know of objects such as their perfume, brightness, shape, color, and so on, are attributes and qualities of which we know nothing, and we can know nothing, owing to the limitation of our senses. Could a man err in plucking a flower and saying there is more in this than meets the eye or the touch or the smell? This is a strange platform for the discussion of such things, said Reynolds. I judge as a sailor you have been a student, Captain Reynolds. Well, yes, I have read and I have thought. The night watch at sea finds you leisure for the latter. Does it not occur to you, said Goodhart, that the mere circumstance of the Esmond having gone down within a night's pull of this island should convince us that ships must pass within sight? Yes, and that sail today is hopeful, answered Reynolds. But I do assure you, keen as my lookout has been, that in 7 months I have seen nothing. After a little more talk of this kind, they went to rest for the night, Reynolds to his bed in the dell, and Goodhart to the cave. The men had prepared grass beds for all hands. The moon shone bright, and Goodhart easily found the mouth and entered. It was very black within. He struck a wax match, not knowing where his couch of grass was. Dim outlines of sleeping men were thrown up. By his little taper, Goodhart perceived a vacant couch close at hand. He blew out his light and lay down. Sailor called out in his sleep, "How's a man to 'ook on if yer don't luff and shake it out of her? Luff, damn you, luff, I say, luff." "What buddy old owl is that a-hooting?" exclaimed the boatswain in a deep voice. A wave of snores followed, and Goodhart slumbered with the rest. Reynolds and his fisher lay watching the moonshine that bathed the sky over the dell. The glowing stars of those temperate heights trembled in the silver mist. The historic hurry of mind which had been his in the morning Ion, his discovery of men in the island and a boat, and which had remained his for some hours, was gone. A sombre tranquillity and abiding emotion of gratitude and of peace had replaced it. He lay thinking of Goodhart. There was something in the manner, the voice, the looks, the gentle smiles and tender pensiveness of the man that fascinated Reynolds and won his heart with the beautiful and irresistible power with which truth, no matter in what it dwells, wins human affection. He impressed him as a man whose character was a harp from whose strings the spirit fingers of the soul swept music that was always sweet and good. What had passed between them in conversation had expressed them as intimate in sympathy, for it had not needed a day for Reynolds to discover that Goodhart had in his time been a student and a thinker, more particularly in those metaphysical walks which Reynolds loved to tread. One point Goodhart had made clear. He was determined not to risk his life by a voyage in a little open craft which was without mast or sail, and in which it would be impossible, so barren was the island in this respect, to store water enough for 8 men to last even on the leanest allowance for more than 2 or 3 days. This was a resolution to give Reynolds pause too. His desire to leave the island, which was consuming when he was alone, was moderated by companionship, moderated to the extent that he was too old a hand as a sailor to take his chance in an open sailing boat when, by waiting, as the sail that hove into sight that morning promised, his deliverance might be procured with comfort and safety. If a sail could be obtained, the hazard of the voyage would be diminished, because even though they should be unable to shape a course for a port, yet by heading due east they were bound to blow into the track of a ship steering north or south. But to start in a rowing boat, he easily understood, would be suicidal. And think as he might, and think as he did, as he lay straining his mind in the fissure, he could not conceive what the island might yield in the shape of a sail, unless the men put his idea about their shirts into practice, and it did not seem to him, as he reflected, that the manufacture of such a sail would be worth the effort. For some days the men were patient and watchful. They dried and smoked a quantity of fish, which they stocked in the locker of the stern sheets of the boat. They were also careful to keep the beaker filled with fresh water in preparation for the instant emergency. They seemed to enjoy this lounging life of the island. They culled nosegays and decorated themselves. They ate oysters and mussels. They fished diligently and cooked their takes. And it will be judged that, after the salt horse and worm-bored sea bread of the forecastle, the mushrooms and cod steaks, and steaks of other fish, and the fish they dried and smoked, provided them with a heavenly banquet. But they had brought with them but a lentil store of plug tobacco. The pieces soon gave out, and the want started a spirit of discontent and restlessness. They hunted for a substitute, but could find nothing of any sort to replace the black Cavendish of their love. They were without rum and wanted tea, cocoa, or coffee for a hot drink. They were sailors, and a sailor without a grievance is a tool without a handle. After a few days they began to feel thoroughly shipwrecked, and the gaze they levelled at the sea line grew more and more ardent and more rebellious. It was easily gatherable from their general bearing that they did not mean to stay long for a ship to appear. Goodhart and Reynolds were inseparable. They had contracted such a liking for each other as promised to become a bond of affectionate friendship. For some time Reynolds was reserved about his past. One afternoon they were seated on a knoll in the shade, where they commanded a fine view of the dazzle of thunder-sounding foam on the south-east side, and of the 2 lovely cataracts which arched in apparently polished, motionless glass from the rocks, then quivered into prisms, tinting the immediate air with pallid lights of spectrum. Goodhart for a few moments watched the bird in silence. "How wonderful that fellow's wings and body are dyed!" he exclaimed. "Look at his white breast and the blue edgings to the indigo that stains the feathers of his wings. God works with a purpose in lights and colours." "Oh yes, undoubtedly," said Reynolds. "I've heard of a little fish whose dorsal spine consists of a long filament arching over the head and mouth, the mouth filled with frightful teeth. At the extremity of the filament there is a brilliant phosphorescent spot. The hideous little monster hangs out this lovely star, and everything small that comes to admire it is devoured." "Yes," said Goodhart, "I have heard of a fish found 3 miles deep with a phosphorescent eye which it kindles at pleasure, either to scare its enemies or allure its victims." "Take the Parliament," said Reynolds, with a glance at the wheeling sea-bird that had attracted Goodhart. "This bird is almost black in summer. Nature protects it by providing changes of colour with the seasons. If it remained black it would be at the mercy of the hawk or the owl of winter, where the country is white with snow. In summer the country is dark. Tartaman is black. In autumn the country is grey, and the ptarmigan turns grey. In winter the plumage of this bird is white. This is also true of the falcon and the snowy owl. If they were black in a country covered with snow, they would be eluded and starved." "Some queer stories are told of the cuckoo," said Goodhart. "It is declared that it lays eggs coloured so as to deceive the birds in whose nests they are deposited. The hedge sparrow is the greatest sufferer at the hands of the cuckoo. I remember reading that a German writer had declared that the cuckoo will sometimes lay perfectly blue eggs. The hoopoes are another illustration of purpose in colour. The ewe is sandy, and by virtue of that they may be known almost certainly to be inhabitants of sandy region. When this bird sees a hawk it throws itself flat on the sandy ground, turns its wings up and erects its bill so as to resemble as closely as possible a bit of old rag." He looked seawards and exclaimed, "I would swear that yonder is a ship, if I were not sure that it was a cloud." He pointed. Reynolds determinedly bent his vision, but what Goodhart saw was invisible to him. His companion viewed him with a gaze tender and touching with commiseration, the sympathy that does not depress like pity, but that exalts by unaffected fellowship of feeling, working like nature from the inside and not like art from the outside. "I devoutly hope," said he, "that we shall soon be released, if only for your sake. It is sad to think of your poor wife." Reynolds fixed his eyes upon the ground. "Have you been long married?" "Long married!" exclaimed Reynolds. "How long have those waterfalls been married? They leap together and unite at the foot in a common grave of foam. But if they coexist they also possess a most consuming divisibility. I tell you a queer story of a wedding, Mr. Goodhart. You are a man of deep thought and great humanity. Perhaps you will be able to suggest a key for the lock of a safe in which lies a jewel so absolutely embowelled that no pearl in its oyster at the bottom of the sea is more secret in distance." Goodhart's face wore an expression of benevolent attention. "Conceive a man loving a woman as purely, loftily, loyally as it is in the power of male flesh and blood to love that which God wills it to yoke. They were married. The mother of the bride was present. She was the bridegroom's very good friend and well-wisher. The bride on her return home from the church locked herself up in her bedroom and refused to see or to speak to or to have anything to do with her husband. No, by old Harry, Mr. Goodhart, she threatened to poison herself if the man ventured so much as to approach her bedroom door. Had the marriage service converted her husband into a hedgehog or a bat or a toad or something which makes women scream and shrink and faint? This wife's loathing could not have been more phenomenally profound. He had his memories of endearments and was paralyzed by astonishment and dismay, and indeed despair. What had come to her? But his letters, his entreaties, her mother's influence availed nothing. He sailed from Falmouth, leaving her behind him. His ship was burnt, and he was cast ashore on an island that was 7 months alone. After he had pronounced these words, his voice failed him. "It's a strange story, Mr. Goodhart, regarding the poor fellow with an expression of touching kindness. When you sailed, you were separated. We have never lived together." "When were you married?" Reynolds gave him the date. Goodhart mused, and his face took on a look of judicial gravity. "It is impossible to consider it as an aversion in her," he said. "Human nature does not change in an hour. If we are to call it an aberration, then we shall know what to think. I shall regard it as a sudden, violent distemper of morality. It is not dislike of you, but love of ego, a disease of self, which the psychologists would view as an antithesis of a mania not rare amongst women. If I were you, I should hail this state of shipwreck as an avenue that is to conduct you to her heart." "How?" "Already your ship is overdue. You will soon be posted. To the imagination of your wife you are a drowned man. Your appeal of abandonment and of death will prove an eloquence that must find her a heart. Give her that, and when you again meet, as surely as she is human, and as surely as you love her, you will find her yours by virtue of an ordeal that should make her more triumphantly your own than any other form of conquest could render her." The marriage service changed her into a statue. Nothing chiselled in marble could be more insensible. "Depend upon it, Captain Reynolds, that a woman's heartbeat under the hard surface, and her conviction of your death and her memory of what preceded your departure, will work in her." "If I return," explained Reynolds, with a little wildness in the look he sent to at the sea, "I shall not seek her, to be repulsed, again spat upon. Time, Mr. Goodhart, time. I have been alone for months, and my thoughts have run as a lonely man's would. But despite the carved figure that weeps over the urn, despite the sumptuous memorial window, I must believe, I must hope, that the inscription wears out, that the slate is cleansed by something else than tears, that the flame is often extinguished before the candle is expended. I trust it will happen as shall make best for your happiness," said Goodhart with emotion. "What is your age?" Reynolds replied. "And your wife's?" Reynolds told him. Goodhart smiled gravely. "You must meet again as sweethearts," he said. "You are proud of her and fond of her. Indeed, you are rapturously fond of her. The charm that won you is still hers. She is your wife. Nothing but God's hand can keep you apart. Not indeed but that chastity so rigid is extremely unamiable and very undesirable. A sister of mercy who nursed me said, 'To prove how bad an opinion God has of us, observe that he is perpetually replacing us and trying others. Generation succeeds generation.' And what opinion," I answered, "can he have of those who think it improper to help him? It is an oversight on the part of a person to marry one with whom personal association is, when rather late in the day, considered objectionable. For example, how much trouble would be saved if men made it a rule to choose the right sister to begin with? The hearts of the bishops would be lighter. There would be a little less talk in the House of Lords. You will find no difficulty in getting another berth." "I can say," answered Reynolds, "captains are very plentiful, and I have not been very fortunate." "I have a friend in Sydney," said Goodhart, "who is a managing director of a coastwise line of steamers. The pay is good, and the people employed are loyally used. I shall be most happy to give you a letter to him." "You are extremely kind, Mr. Goodhart, but you will naturally wish to return to England to follow your profession in that country." "Why?" "Your wife is in England." Reynolds shook his head. Goodhart smiled. "We were just now talking of purpose in colour," said he, breaking from a subject that might have easily been made painful by even a nuance of insistence. "I have often asked myself to what degree is colour necessary as a fibre or thread in the woof of a matter. The solar light is formed of coloured rays, visible and invisible, and by and in that light does creation move and have its being. But it is colour essential as a constituent of matter. For instance, is colour a part of the flower's life, so that in the absence of colour the flower would need something as necessary to its being as any formative condition of its existence? Or, restricting myself to the flower, is it painted merely to delight? If so, whose delight is it coloured? Is it to be supposed that the sole purpose of colour is to gratify the aesthetic sense in man? The colour is a created thing whose existence is independent of human sensation is too clear to need talking about. If visually we know that the colour is a concomitant of state or change, we have a right to infer that colour is an abiding quality in coloured matter, and that the conditions under which it accompanies all mutations render it is inseparable from matter, a property therefore indwelling in objects both in darkness and light. "You mean," said Reynolds, "that if, for example, you carried a red rose into a bright room, it would retain its colour?" "I mean," answered Goodhart, "that the cause of the redness remains in the rose in the black room, and what is that cause but colour? It seems to me—" Now what should seem stranger than the two shipwrecked men, one of whom slept in a cave, whilst the other took his rest in a fissure in a dell, should be found upon a little island, seated on a grassy rise in the shade, discussing abstract problems of science with as much sincerity as if they were going up for an examination, with their chance of deliverance from their awful position so fatal as to entitle them to a habit of mental prostration. But in the human mind there is latent a power of philosophy which almost unconsciously helps it to adapt itself to any state it might chance to be in without violent departure from the old habits or forms of thought. Suppose two maids of honour flung ashore from the sea, why should not they at intervals talk of drawing-room presentation, the Duchess's red face, the blazing fat throat of Lady Throgmorton Street, things, it is true, of a past more or less recent, but topics of habitual inspiration nevertheless? Two stock-jobbers, similarly cast upon the deep, might be expected in the pauses between the meals of mussels and the search for something more digestible to talk of loans and mines, of Goshen's year, and the prospects of Japan. Our two companions loved science, and from time to time, as we see, there was nothing in shipwreck to stop them from talking about it. But their story after a brief passage was to change suddenly into the eventful. End of Chapter 8. Recording by Gary Oldman, Middletown, New York.